Everyone loves a good Easter egg, hidden detail, or small joke in their favorite movies, which is exactly what I'm going to be talking about in this very video. Specifically, I'll be looking at the films within the main Harry Potter series. None of that Fantastic Beasts stuff this time around. And there are quite a few doozies in here. Nothing earth-shattering, mind you, but I'm sure at least a few of these will have you busting out your Harry Potter Blu-rays and going back to check them out for yourself. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. I think we all know what the Deathly Hallows are and what their fancy triangle symbol looks like. You know, the triangle representing the Elder Wand, Cloak of Invisibility, and the Stone, Philosopher or Sorcerer, depending on where you're from. I know you know it because odds are at least 20 people watching this video right now have it permanently drawn on their body somewhere. Which is why I will often jokingly refer to it as the Chinese characters of fandom tattoos. Just kind of basic. Not throwing any shade. I mean, I'm a guy who's planning on getting a Quake tattoo, so I'm lame in my own ways. Anyways, did you know that we actually saw this symbol long before Harry and the gang had any idea that it was even a thing? Back in the fourth movie in the franchise, Goblet of Fire, we caught a glimpse at some magical doodad inside of a glass case as Dumbledore peered in. Though absolutely no attention was drawn to it at the time, the object to the left of the headmaster's reflection is a pyramid with a metal rod suspending a sphere in the middle of it, effectively making it a three-dimensional representation of the Deathly Hallows symbol. Here's the thing though, this movie came out a good couple of years before the 7th book was released, which is where the symbol was first described, meaning that this is either a major coincidence or some clever foreshadowing and world building. Let's stick with the symbolic foreshadowing for a moment and talk about Tom Riddle's odd fascination with the number 7. Or rather, I guess it would be the author who shall not be named's fascination with the number 7, which actually appears quite a few times throughout the series. For instance, there are 7 books, so there's a pretty good example. Fun fact, the number 7 is actually something that a lot of people believe has a deeper meaning, probably due to its religious connections, and as such has made its way into a lot of works of fiction as a number with great significance. The first example that comes to mind for me is when Bungie was running the Halo series, the number was just all over the place there. So, in the Half-Blood Prince, during the flashback where we see Dumbledore visiting a young Tom Riddle, when we see the 7 stones sitting on his windowsill, it's safe to assume that that was done on purpose. In this case, the 7 stones seem to foreshadow Riddle's eventual plan to split his soul into 7 pieces, his 7 Horcruxes. Though it is worth noting that the 7th Horcrux was created accidentally and not actually part of his original plan, so it's probably safe to assume that he wasn't thinking back fondly on his rock collection when he came up with his original idea, unless he just really didn't like the 7th rock for whatever reason. Either way, it's a cool bit of visual foreshadowing by the set design team working on the movie. Here's a fun one that I'm sure most of you probably didn't catch. In fact, I didn't notice this until I was doing research for this very video. Costume design is something that I feel like a lot of your average moviegoers don't pay a ton of attention to. But it is yet another tool in the filmmaker's arsenal that they can use for storytelling. So maybe it is something that audiences should spend a little bit more time thinking about. Throughout the entirety of the last 2 movies, Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, if you look at Voldemort's robes, they seem to get more faded and worn the further into the movie we get, going from all black and neat to a lighter shade of gray and frayed around the edges. This change actually corresponds to the destruction of his Horcruxes. As Harry's crew destroyed each one, the Dark Lord's clothing shifted, making him appear as though he was fading away himself, or turning into dust and floating away as he did when the last one was destroyed and Harry managed to defeat it. But really, we're just kind of splitting hairs on that. Quidditch is certainly a cool, though largely pointless aspect of the Harry Potter plotlines, and I stand by that fact. While the inclusion of this sport does a lot to help with world building, and provides the occasional action set piece in the earlier movies where the stakes were generally a lot lower, its role in the overall plotline of the series is actually kind of meaningless. but it did give us at least one cool detail if you're paying attention. On several occasions, we get to see Harry suit up as a member of the Gryffindor team, specifically as the Seeker, also known as the person on the team who basically completely ignores the rest of the game and instead chases a tiny little gold ball around, which if they catch successfully, it means that their team pretty much wins regardless of what else was going on with the other players. It's a really strange sport. Kinda makes blitzball seem downright normal. In the 6th movie, The Half-Blood Prince, Harry even becomes the captain of his house team, and we get a look at his number, which is 7. You know what else Harry is the 7th of? Voldemort's Horcruxes. You know, the accidentally created one that I mentioned earlier. It's yet another example of costume designers getting a bit cheeky and helping to tell the story of the films without being too in your face about it. I love it, unlike Quidditch, which I'm not too big of a fan of in case you couldn't already tell. The paintings hanging around Hogwarts throughout the entire film franchise could probably fill up an entire video like this on their own, considering the amount of small jokes and Easter eggs hidden amongst them. However, there is one that I specifically want to highlight here. In the first movie, as Harry, Ron, and Hermione enter a staircase, hanging on the wall behind them is a rather innocuous looking piece, showing a simple woman sitting for her portrait. That is actually a portrait of somebody who existed historically, as that is Anne Boleyn. That name might sound really familiar, even if you aren't a history buff. But just in case you have no idea who she is, here's a very brief rundown of what she did. Or rather, I guess what she had done to her. Anne was the Queen of England for about 3 years in the 1500s, specifically 1533 to 1536. During those years, she was married to King Henry VIII, who is a rather noteworthy man in his own right, as he was the one who split England from the Catholic Church, due in large part to being excommunicated because he had his previous marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled in order to marry Anne. You've probably actually heard his story quite a few times, as he is really famous for being the king who would constantly get new wives when his current ones failed to give him a son, which is exactly what happened to Anne. Since Anne did not conceive a son, instead giving birth to the future Queen Elizabeth I, Henry eventually went looking for wife number 3, but needed a reason to split from Anne. So he had her brought up on charges of adultery, incest, and treason, as well as a sprinkling of being a witch, and subsequently executed. So, you know, fun stuff. So the Harry Potter franchise basically just confirmed that, at least within the canon of the Wizarding world, those witchcraft charges were accurate. Thankfully, since it's a franchise aimed at children, they didn't say anything about those other ones. The death of Fred at the Battle of Hogwarts might very well be the saddest part of the entire Harry Potter franchise. Seriously, nothing hits harder than seeing a family as close as the Weasleys mourning the death of one of their own, especially when it's one half of a pair of twins. And to make it even sadder, here's something that I didn't even notice until just now. When Harry reveals that he is, in fact, alive, despite what Voldemort thought, we see a reaction shot of the group. And if you're paying attention, you can spot George turning to say something to his brother, who had spent his entire life right next to him, only to be painfully reminded that he wasn't there anymore. Good luck watching the rest of this video through all of those tears that you're probably shedding right now. I'm sorry. Okay, let's wash all the sad thoughts out of our brains with a fun entry. At least, I think it's fun, as I'm a colossal nerd who's really into these kind of small details. Hence why I work for a YouTube channel that talks about this kind of stuff near constantly. It's kind of our shtick. Anyways, in Chamber of Secrets, as Harry is looking at Tom Riddle's diary, he's illuminated by a small lantern that gives off a subtle orange glow. Then we see him sucked into the book, which is presented to us with a super desaturated look. Almost black and white, but not entirely there. If you look at Harry though, despite the scene he is in being lit by its own light sources, Harry is still visibly lit by the lantern, as seen by that orange glow upon his face. The light is even coming from a different direction. If you look in that flashback, Tom is being lit from one side, while Harry is lit from the other. Something that would be impossible if not for computer effects, obviously. It's a small detail, but it goes a long ways towards helping Harry feel like he doesn't belong within this environment, separating him from what is going on. It's such a cool bit of filmmaking. In 2007, two actors from the Harry Potter franchise, Daniel Radcliffe and Richard Griffiths, who played Vernon Dursley by the way, appeared in a stage play called Equus, about a troubled young man and his psychiatrist working through some serious mental health issues involving horses and sexuality and all kinds of really deep and very mature things. It's something about as far removed from the subject matter of Harry Potter as you can possibly imagine. Which is why seeing a poster for the play in Deathly Hallows Part 1 is kind of funny to me. In the scene in the cafe, if you look really close in the background, on a bulletin board covered in a bunch of flyers and such, there, smack dab in the middle, is a poster for the play. Now this was obviously put there as a nice little nod to the actors by the filmmakers, but I like to think it's further proof of wizards mucking about with time and space. As the Harry Potter movies take place in the 90s, seeing a poster for a play from 2007 is as bizarre as anything else going on. Maybe a Death Eater traveled through time and put it there to really mess with Harry's head. Or maybe I'm just reading way too far into this and it's actually that first thing that I mentioned. Either or. They say that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And this is the case whether you are a muggle, a wizard, or a half-blood. And what is the best thing to have for breakfast? Hands down, waffles. Don't even try to fight me on that. Cereal is a close second though. And when it comes to cereal, a personal favorite of mine is Honey Nut Cheerios. Hashtag not sponsored, but it could be. General Mills, hit us up. Now, this stuff is great, but naturally you'd have to assume that wizards would want a wizard version. I mean, I don't even think the wizards have ever stepped foot into a supermarket, and I kinda doubt the major distributors deliver to Diagon Alley. In Order of the Phoenix, we got to see the wizarding equivalent, when a box of Cherri-Owls was seen on a table in the dining hall as Harry and the gang walked through one morning. I think it's pretty safe to assume that they're basically just Cheerios, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to try them. I'm actually kind of surprised that no one thought to do a limited run of these at some point. Corporations will try to sell basically anything to nerds like us, so it's probably safe to assume that at least some of them would sell. Remember earlier how I pointed out that Harry was the seeker for the Gryffindor Quidditch team? You know, that thing that all of us already knew? Well, he is apparently really flippin' good at it, according to literally everybody in the stories. And we got our first real glimpse at just how good he would be in that position when he was first introduced to the concept of the Snitch by Oliver Wood in the first movie. As Oliver is explaining what the deal with the little golden ball is, it flies out of his hand and up into the sky. Eagle-eyed viewers can catch that Wood very quickly loses sight of it, looking around in random directions for it. Meanwhile, Harry had his gaze transfixed upon it. It's a small yet really effective directing choice that I'm honestly surprised not a lot of people talk about. Usually when you bring up this scene, people just make fun of Wood and say that it's just stupid overacting. But I like to think it was a conscious decision. It just works too well not to be. There are a lot of statues around Hogwarts. So much so that it's easy to ignore about 90% of them and just mentally write them off as visual noise. However, there is one that we see in Prisoner of Azkaban that actually has a pretty cool origin. In that movie, near the corner of the frame in one shot, we can see a statue of an eagle eating a snake. Fans of vexillology will immediately recognize that this is the same image as depicted upon the flag of the nation of Mexico. This is no coincidence, as this was specifically added in at the request of the film's director, Alfonso Cuarón, who wanted to pay tribute to his Mexican heritage in some small way within the movie. It's small and rather subtle, but a nice nod regardless. You know that clock thingy within the Weasley's house that is less of a clock and more of a magical GPS, creepily tracking all 10,000 or so members of the red-headed family and letting everybody nearby know where they are at any given point in time? That is some surveillance state stuff if I've ever heard of it. Anyways, creepiness aside, did you notice that one of the possible options on there admits normal everyday ones like home, school, work, etc., is one simply labeled prison? It kind of makes you wonder how much time the Weasleys have spent in the slammer. Although now that I say that out loud, I realize that Fred and George have probably done at least some time for one of their pranks. So, what are you in for?
I killed a man. You?
My twin brother and I turned a dude into a newt. Hey, where are you going? So you know how earlier I talked about the paintings in Hogwarts housing a bunch of different Easter eggs, jokes, and little details? Well, one that I wanted to bring up isn't exactly the most safe for children, but, you know, still kind of funny regardless. One thing that we learn within the Harry Potter movies is that people within paintings can, and often do, move out of their initial piece and wander around other paintings. They do this usually to socialize and to explore. Well, one knight during The Prisoner of Azkaban used his ability to move around to get a bit fresh with a young maiden, who promptly showed him what happens to impolite men. It's a quick little visual gag and probably one that flew under the radar of most moviegoers, but it's still a fun bit of humor nonetheless. Hey there everybody, I'm John Aljets. I made this video and now I want to know what you think. What are some of your favorite hidden details and Easter eggs within the Harry Potter movies? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, or go ahead and shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to ScreenRant for even more great videos just like this in the future.